In August 2025, the Ford Carrier Strike Group had been doing what American sailors have done here for 40 years, keeping the North Atlantic open so IKEA furniture could reach American living rooms. Everything was fine until a circling aircraft detected something that would trigger the most intense submarine hunt since the Cold War. Unknown to the Americans, the Russians had just received orders from the Northern Fleet. Close with the Americans and collect everything. But Moscow was about to learn why challenging the U.S. Navy in the Atlantic is about as smart as telling your wife she has gained 10 pounds. Inside the Ford's Combat Information Center, the tactical action officer watched the submarine's vectors with the calm that comes from having 4 Arleigh Burke destroyers with enough ordnance to turn any submarine into an artificial reef. At the Russians' current speed, they'd reach torpedo range in exactly 47 minutes. The math was simple for the Russians. Their torpedoes would cover the remaining distance in under 6 minutes once launched. But the Ford's escorts had ASROCs, which are anti-submarine rockets that could reach them in 90 seconds. At 15:03, the admiral wanted to know the probable intent of the Russian boats. The answer was obvious. At current speed and heading, they'd be within intelligence collection range in 40 minutes. The recommendation was to go to general quarters, but the admiral's response was pure American confidence. Let's see how badly they want to embarrass themselves first. That is assuming they could even maintain their approach undetected. Within seconds, Link 16 automatically shared the submarine data across every NATO asset in the region. What happened next was like watching a SWAT team respond to someone trying to rob a lemonade stand. A British Type 23 frigate conducting exercises 50 miles north immediately turned south at flank speed. 8 P-8 Poseidon scrambled from bases in Scotland, Norway, and Iceland. Each one, a 130 million all-submarine hunter that could hear a shrimp sneeze at 500 m depth. The Virginia-class submarine, which had been shadowing the Russians since they left port 3 days ago, finally got permission to make her presence felt. At 15:15, the tactical picture went from interesting to comedy gold. The Russians executed what they thought was a clever deception. One sub ascended to 200 m, making deliberate noise while the other 2 went deep, trying to slip in undetected. Classic Wolfpack tactics from 1943, except this was 2025. And NATO's acoustic processors could tell the difference between a noisy decoy and 2 quiet submarines that sounded like a broken wheel in a shopping cart. The Russians weren't just being aggressive, they were attempting a coordinated intelligence operation that would have been cutting edge in 1985. They wanted to record the Ford's acoustic signatures, map her escort formations, catalog radar emissions, all valuable intelligence if you are planning to fight the U.S. Navy. The problem for the Russians was they had no idea what was coming next as numerous ships and aircraft converged on their position, like a swarm of Chirons descending on a restaurant manager. By 200 hours, the first P-8 Poseidon arrived overhead, and the 3 Russian submarines were about to learn what hammering meant in NATO terms. The P-8 is a Boeing 737 that gave up carrying tourists to Florida to become the world's most sophisticated submarine hunter. It costs $130 million and can hear a dolphin argue with its spouse at 500 m depth. The P-8 started its work by dropping sonobuoys in what is called a boxing pattern. These die-cast buoys, directional command-activated sonobuoy systems, basically underwater microphones that scream at submarines until they give up their position, cost more than most Russians make in a year. And NATO was giving them away like they were going out of style. Each buoy started pinging active sonar at 140 dB. For reference, that is louder than a gunshot. And it is happening inside a metal tube. Imagine being locked in a shipping container while someone plays drums on the outside forever. Inside the Kazan, the first ping hit like someone had replaced their submarine with a giant bell, and the rock had just taken a swing. The sonar operators ripped off their headphones so fast they probably needed neck surgery. That beautiful silent service reputation gone. They were now the loudest thing in the ocean, like a Harley Davidson at a meditation retreat every 30 seconds. Ping. No escape, no relief, just ping. While the Russians were running in circles, the PA crews were living their best life. Fresh crews every 4 hours. Actual food that wasn't served through a tube. Bathrooms that didn't share space with nuclear missiles. They were basically operating from a flying way work, while the Russians were trapped in the underwater equivalent of a Spirit Airlines middle seat. But the U.S. Navy just got started. Time for the Arleigh Burke destroyers to earn their paychecks. They activated their hull-mounted sonar, a bow-mounted spherical array containing hundreds of transducers that listens for echoes bouncing off submarines like underwater radar, and joined the acoustic assault. These systems can pump out so much acoustic energy that Fierce near the ship literally gets stunned. The Russians weren't just being hunted. They were experiencing what happens when America decides to use the ocean as a concert speaker. Then came the simulated attack runs. P-8S would dive from 25,000 feet, screaming toward the ocean like they were about to drop weapons. The Russian submarine crews, already running on no sleep, had to assume each run might be real. Emergency dive, blow ballast, hard rudder. It is like someone trying to play that hand slap game where they fake you out 50 times. You flinch every time, even when you know they're just messing with you. The Kassan tried the submarine equivalent of flooring it in a police chase, a 30-knot sprint to break contact. The OK-650V reactor pushed 43,000 horsepower through the water, which sounds impressive until you realize it made them sound like someone threw a washing machine full of hammers down an elevator shaft. But why would the Russians put up with all this crap? Look at the radars on the Ford's mast. Every radar has a fingerprint, specific frequencies, pulse patterns, power levels. Get those and you can develop jammers to bind it. They were recording the entire electromagnetic spectrum, cataloging every emission. The carrier launches aircraft every 90 seconds during flight ops. That pattern tells you crew shift schedules, maintenance windows, and vulnerability periods. They were mapping which escorts used which data link channels, how the formation communicated, building a digital blueprint of American carrier operations. This intelligence would let them develop specific weapons and tactics to attack carrier groups. Except NATO wasn't going to let them finish their homework assignment. All three submarines launched acoustic decoys, devices designed to mimic submarine sounds and confuse pursuers. NATO's response was beautiful. Their computers classified each decoy in about a third of a second, basically said, "Ha, that is cute," and maintained the perfect tracking on all three real submarines. It was like watching someone try to escape the cops by throwing a mannequin out of their car while the cops have helicopters and satellites and your license plate number. And it was only going to get worse from here. By hour 24, NATO had turned submarine hunting into performance art. A British ship arrived with her Type 2087 towed array sonar, dragging 2 kilometers of hydrophones, basically underwater listening devices behind her. MH-60 Romeo helicopters started taking shifts, hovering 50 feet above the water, and lowering their dipping sonar looking for the subs. The Russians were trying to hide using thermal climbed layers, basically underwater temperature boundaries that can deflect sonar. Too bad dipping sonar goes straight through them like they're not even there. It is like trying to hide from your wife behind a glass door. But despite how easy these aircraft made it look, the coordination all of this took was insane. And one wrong move could leave someone bonking someone else. To accomplish this, NATO had divided the airspace into blocks. P-8s from 20,000 to 25,000 feet, helicopters below 500 feet, with 5,000 feet separation between aircraft horizontally. Each nation was assigned specific radio frequencies, Americans on UHF, British on VHF, Norwegians on both because they had to translate. Every aircraft had an assigned patrol box like aerial parking spaces, and you needed permission from the airborne controller to leave your box. The controller was juggling aircraft from 3 nations, all with different capabilities and limitations. The Data Fusion Center at Northwood was combining sensor feeds from all platforms in real time, creating a 3D picture of the battle space that looked like the world's most expensive video game. But this was real life, and these sailors were having a grand old time with the Russians. The helicopters would hover directly above the submarines, lower their sonar, and start pinging. The Russian crews could probably feel it in their teeth. Meanwhile, the Arleigh Burke destroyers weren't just using their whole sonar. They deployed their AN/SQR-19 towed arrays, basically dragging their own underwater microphones to catch any sound the Russians made. Rumor has it one Russian submariner asked his captain if they could just surface and apologize because the pings were hurting his tummy. The Russians weren't just being hunted. They were experiencing what happens when America decides to use the ocean as a speaker system. The submarines soon had more sonar contacts on their screen than a Kardashian has Instagram notifications between P-8s above helicopters at medium depth and surface ships all around them. This wasn't hunting anymore. This was a smackdown. NATO had turned the Norwegian Sea into a 48-hour EDM festival where Russia couldn't find the exit and the base never stopped. But here is the beautiful part. Remember that Virginia-class submarine we mentioned? For 48 hours, this American submarine maintained perfect trail position using its TB-34 towed array sonar running so quiet on electric motors that it was basically a ghost with torpedoes. The crew was watching this unfold like a Netflix documentary called Making a Submariner. Why Russia can't. They were recording every sound, every evasive maneuver, every desperate attempt to break contact. The Russians tried everything. Hide in underwater canyons. NATO positioned helicopters directly overhead with dipping sonar like fishing in a barrel. Change depth radically. The destroyer sonar could track them from the surface to the sea floor, sprint and drift. The American sub matched every move, like a dance partner who knew the routine better than they did. At one point, the captain decided to send a message. One quick pulse of active sonar from their BQQ-10 bow array. Not enough to give away their exact position, but enough to let the Russians know they've been followed the entire time. Imagine being stalked by John Cena for 2 days. You can't see him, but he is definitely there, and he occasionally whispers, "You can't see me." Just a mess with your head. By day 2, P-8 crews had developed a system. They timed their sonar pings to prevent REM sleep cycles just as the Russian crews would start to drift off. Ping! It is like having a roommate who sets their alarm for every 5 minutes, but never actually gets up. After 48 hours of this, the Russian sailors were probably seeing colors that don't exist and having conversations with people who weren't there, and it still wasn't over. The Russians were about to get desperate to break contact. After 48 hours, the 3 Russian submarines tried desperately to run away. They used every trick in the Soviet handbook, which would have been great if this was 1982 and NATO hadn't written the handbook. Bottom terrain, the P-8 switched to magnetic anomaly detection. Radical depth charges, destroyers had them covered from surface to seafloor. Launch every remaining decoy. NATO systems catalogs them like Pokemon cards. Got to catch them all, and they're all worthless. Well, at least most of the time. After several hours of this, the Russians soon learned that trying to break contact with NATO in the Norwegian Sea is like trying to lose the IRS during tax season. They know where you are going, and how much you owe them. The Russians finally had to abort their intelligence mission, which in military terms means run away while pretending it was the plan all along. They withdrew north, still submerged, probably composing the reports about the successful reconnaissance operation that definitely didn't involve 48 hours of acoustic hammering. NATO maintained contact as they withdrew, like bouncers escorting someone out of the club. The P-8 followed them partway to ensure they actually left and to rub it in. Everyone knows what happened, but we're keeping up appearances. During those 48 hours, NATO collected enough acoustic intelligence to recognize these submarines from space. Every pump, valve, even how their toilets flush is now in NATO's database. Russian state media spun this as a successful intelligence-gathering mission. Sure. And the Titanic successfully tested its ice detection capabilities. They learned that the Norwegian Sea is less contested waters and more NATO swimming pool. The overall lesson was simple but profound. You can build all the advanced submarines you want, but if you can't handle 2 days of democracy's greatest hits played over active sonar, maybe don't go in the deep end next time. Bye for now.